My name is Drew Waldron, and I am on with former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Julianne Smith. Julie, it's great to sit down with you.
Great to do this. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And you have such an unbelievable career. You worked in the State Department, the White House, the Department of Defense, and most notably under the Biden administration, you were the U.S. Ambassador to NATO. So I think I want to start out by asking, what first drew you to public service early on in your career?
Well, I did want to find a way to serve my country, feel like I was doing something for the greater good. And so I was drawn to the world of foreign policy. And there are different ways you can contribute to national security and foreign policy. But ultimately, I felt like representing my country abroad would be exciting. It would be a unique challenge and a wonderful opportunity if I had the chance. And obviously, the highlight in that sense was really serving as the US ambassador to NATO over the last 3 years. And it was an incredible honor at a very interesting time with the war in Ukraine. But I highly recommend public service to the next generation of students, of young people. It's an incredibly rewarding career path. And I've never thought twice about it. I'm really glad that I opted to serve in government.
You're absolutely correct that it was a very interesting time. Our audience might not know this about you, but you were at NATO when the war in Ukraine first started. So tell me, what was that morning like? And especially being in that location, having your role, what was your first reaction in that moment?
The war started February 24th, 2022. I was asleep. It was the middle of the night. My phone rang in my home, and I had a call from Washington from what we call State Ops, the State Department's Operations Center. And they told me what I feared was coming, and that was that Russia had officially launched a war against Ukraine. I quickly got dressed. I was told that in a few short hours, the NATO alliance would convene an emergency session where all the allies would sit around in a table, and we would immediately need to determine what we would do in the face of the first major land war in Europe since World War II. And fortunately, we had spent weeks preparing for this moment. All of the allies had talked about what we would do to reinforce NATO's eastern flank, what we would do to support Ukraine, and what we would do to ensure that there were consequences for Russia. So we set to work that morning. I'll never forget it. It came in at about 4 in the morning. It was dark. Everyone was walking into the alliance. 4,000 people work at NATO, so everyone's coming in very somber mood. But we rolled up our sleeves, we got to work, and we jumped into action. And definitely one of the most memorable moments of my career. But everyone jokes about serving in government that sometimes you get these 3 a.m. calls, and I actually did get a 3 a.m. call.
My gosh. And you bring up that it was such a historic moment. From a historical point of view, what does it feel like to be in those buildings, be in those rooms, make those decisions, and know that it's going to play a major part in U.S. history decades down the line? What does that feel like personally?
Well, we did. I think all of us, all the ambassadors that sat around the table that day, all 30 ambassadors at the time, Sweden and Finland hadn't joined the alliance yet, but of course they decided to join just a few months after the war started. But so all 30 of us sat around that table, and I think we did feel the seriousness of the moment. We knew that the decisions that we were taking that morning would be historic, that they would be consequential. And it was important for both the people of Ukraine to feel supported, and it was important for Putin to feel like there was some punitive measure that would be taken in light of this unprovoked aggression that he had just randomly decided to launch that morning. So it did weigh heavily on us, but there's a certain sense of pride there as well that you are sitting. I remember I sat down at the table, and you sit behind a little sign of mine says United States. We all sit behind a little placard of representing, the country that we're there to work for. And I remember looking at that placard, looking at the words the United States, and really thinking, this is it. This is not a drill. You are representing your country at a time when a war is starting in Europe, and this moment counts. And so it did weigh heavily on us that morning. But again, we walked away after that first full day feeling that we had really met the moment with a series of steps that felt appropriate, given that war had just broken out in Europe.
My gosh, I could not even imagine. Now, I understand that NATO only makes decisions by consensus, which means that all 32 allies must agree on any decision. How do you approach the work that you do when you know that there's such a large communication obstacle, like getting 32 allies to all align their views?
Yeah, this is pretty tricky. So imagine that you and 31 friends decide tonight that you're going to go out for dinner, and you all have to decide on one restaurant. You know how hard that is to try and meet everyone's needs and interests. Well, it's a lot harder inside NATO when you're trying to make decisions and craft new policies and initiatives that everyone will sign off on. You are right. Everything in the alliance is done only when everyone agrees. It's not majority vote, it's consensus. So that means on any given day, one hand can go up and the country can say, we're not up for it. We're not doing it. We're going to block it. And that's kind of how things go at NATO. But the good news is NATO's been around for 75 years. We know how to make decisions. We know how to argue with each other. We know it's not always smooth sailing. And so what we do is we break it down into groups. If there are two or three countries that disagree with something, we scurry over and talk to those countries and say, what's bothering you? How can we work with you? Can we reach a compromise? If it's a bigger group of countries, sometimes you have to start over. If you've just lost one country, usually pressure can work in some cases to say, look, everybody wants to do X. Why do you want to do Y? And so you can kind of work through the differences. But the great thing about it is a lot of people look at the consensus voting and they say, that seems like a liability, a weakness, but actually it's a strength because when all 32 nations around the table agree to do something, it's much more powerful than just having one or two countries deciding to do something. The collective weight of the alliance getting behind a position really counts for something. And I'll tell you, President Putin and President Xi in China, they don't like when the alliance is united because they see the strength in the numbers. So, yes, it's difficult. Yes, it takes work. Sometimes you want to tear your hair out because it's really challenging on some days. But at the end of the day, when you get it done, it really counts. It really counts for something.
And shifting to current events, right now Europe is set to spend a large amount of money on defense. For our viewers, can you explain why that's happening now and the geopolitical impacts that you think it will have in the near future?
So, great question. So, for about 30 years, all American presidents of all political parties have asked Europeans to do more for their defense. Basically, since the end of the Cold War, even a little bit before then, allies really assumed there was no big threat in Europe or around Europe, and so that they could drop their defense spending and just rely on the United States. And over time, many presidents said, well, that's not right. We all have to do our fair share. So finally, what happened in 2014, President Obama said, look, guys, everybody has to spend 2% of your GDP on your own national defense. Let's get everybody up to a baseline of spending. And you've got 10 years to do it, and the clock starts now. Well, then they did some increases under President Obama. They did some increases under President Trump's first term. They did a little bit of increases, or actually a big jump, these last 4 years, mostly because the war in Ukraine really alerted them to the fact that the world is not a safe place. And then again, with President Trump returning, they're increasing again. So we've seen a huge surge in defense spending in Europe. And what this means is not tomorrow, not next year, but over the next 5 to 10 years, Europe and the United States are going to be more on par. And so Europe really won't be our little brother anymore. We won't pat them on the head and say, hey, follow us, and we know everything that you should be doing. I think it's going to bring a different dynamic to the transatlantic relationship where Europeans will feel like our equal. But the good news is they'll be doing more for their own security, which means we can do less and we can focus on other things like China or other challenges around the world. So it's a win-win. We wanted this to happen. They're finally doing it. It's a little late. They should have done it decades ago. But anyways, they're on it and they're really boosting their spending. And literally in the next couple of years, we will see hundreds of billions of euros spent in Europe on defense.
My gosh, I think I want to stay on current events for this next question, and I think this will be our last one. It's a really big question that I'm sure you've been asked multiple times over the last several years. Do you think that peace can be brought to Ukraine? And I ask because month by month, we're seeing massive developments. The U.S. recently had a very contentious Oval Office meeting with Zelensky. What do you make of the U.S.'s current approach?
So let me step back and say I do believe we can bring peace to Ukraine if we do this well and we do it smartly. I do think President Zelensky would love nothing more than to see the war end. Unfortunately, Russia is the aggressor here. Russia started the war, and we have to ensure that Russia agrees to stop the war as well. We don't want to just work one side, and we want to ensure that these negotiations have all parties involved. Right now, President Trump is very focused on the Russia piece. He has engaged with the Ukrainians. It's been scratchy. He doesn't have a great relationship with President Zelensky, but you cannot end a war without the two warring parties ultimately being at the table. The other piece to it that's complicated is Europe has actually given more assistance to Ukraine than the United States. They've housed millions of Ukrainian refugees. They've given Ukraine economic assistance and weapons. And because of that, Europe wants to be part of the final negotiation as well. They don't want to just be called and told, hey, this is the deal we cut, and this is what you're responsible for. You should send some sort of peacekeeping force. I mean, they really want to be part of it. So, what I hope happens in the weeks and months ahead is that the United States serves more of an honest broker between the two warring parties, not just tilting towards one side, and being, in my view, perhaps too accommodating. But then also we bring Europe into the negotiations because at the end of the day, if a peacekeeping force is required, my bet is that Europe will take most of the responsibility for that. So we want to make sure that all those parties are at the table and continue to be part of the negotiation. But I do think it's possible. I don't think it happens overnight. I think it could take more than a year, not a day, as some have suggested. But it is within reach. I do think it's within reach.
Julie, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and your expertise with us. You are a phenomenal person to interview, but my gosh, the research that had to go into this. You are a conversationally intimidating woman to talk to.
Don't be intimidated. It's my pleasure, and thanks for doing it.
Absolutely. That will conclude our conversation with Julianne Smith. Julie, again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.